Now, moving on to another topic, you heard some evidence by Mary Adams about her concerns about your efforts to locate the particular priest,
yes,
the relieving priest at Neerkol who abused her.
Yes.
Now, again, you've met Mrs. Adams.
Yes.
And do you believe the allegations that she's made, the complaints that she's made to you of the abuse by Father John or Father Johns?
No doubt about those, the reality of that abuse.
And is it your view that you took steps to endeavour to find out who the priest was?
Yes, I certainly did take steps.
Right. If we could have document CTJH 200 02034 0070 up on the screen. This is an annotated copy of the minutes which are behind tab 170, but this document itself isn't in the tender bundle. Now, what is going to come up, Bishop, is the minutes of a diocesan professional standards resource group meeting. We've heard about that, the role of that group,
yes,
held in October 1997. And when that comes up, we can go halfway down the first page to the topic, it's not there yet, I don't think, headed case discussion. Hasn't yet arrived, but perhaps I can just remind you of the content of that note.
certainly.
And do we have a hard copy? We do have a hard copy, Commissioners. Would there be any objection to the witness being shown that? Sorry? And you have them as well? Hmm? You've got it. Everyone has it. So perhaps if the Commissioners would have it as well. Now, Bishop, this is a copy of the 28th of October 1997 minutes, and you will see halfway down on the first page it says case discussion.
Yes.
And number one, complaint by a woman residing in Brisbane of a relieving priest at Neerkol, and that is a reference, as you understand it, to Mary Adams.
Yes.
And she says she cannot recall the names of the priests due to time lapse. And you say Bishop Bryan has received information regarding the complaints from Dr. Ken Robertson, who has made relevant reference to detect names. Now, who was Dr. Ken Robertson?
Dr. Ken Robertson was the Queensland Director of Professional Standards.
And do you understand from that reference, bearing in mind it's about 18 years ago, that he made efforts to detect who the priests might be?
Yes, I believe so.
And there were some group suggestions about how to deal with this. The first one was give the names to the Sisters of Mercy.
Yes.
Do you recall if that happened?
As far as I know, it did.
Then Bishop Bryan to meet the distressed woman, listen and respond, and offer referral contacts. Do you recall if that happened?
Good.
That she be advised of procedures in place towards healing by the contact person in her area. Do you recall if that happened?
I presume it did happen. I believe it happened.
And then to give her more acknowledgement of her complaint could be of consolation to her. And then there's a suggestion that it's important to find the priest, not only because of Mrs. Adams' complaints, but also that an accused person must be advised as soon as possible after you've been given a complaint.
Yes.
So are the notes below that last line in your handwriting?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, what does the first box say? The first note, no records...
No records of relieving priest.
All right. What does that indicate to you about what you did in relation to finding out the names of the relieving priest?
Well, it's possible the second note came first, that I fully acknowledged that the complaint had been made by Mary, and the second note that nothing was found in consultation with Sisters of Mercy or in consulting the Australian record or directory, which has the names of all the priests, of all the diocesan priests and religious order priests from throughout Australia. We couldn't sort of identify from that any person who seemed to represent or fulfil the description that Mary Adams had given to us. We checked the baptismal records at Neerkol. If a visiting priest baptised a child, that would have been recorded. There was no indication there.
And so the first part then is the summary of that there are no records of the relieving priest. And then there's a note saying hold. Does that say Margie to dialogue?
Yes, I understand that would mean that Margie Newton would continue the dialogue with Mary.
Now, if the document at Tender Bundle 171 could come up, and Your Honour, I'll be seeking to tender these documents at the end of the Bishop's evidence. Tender Bundle 171. Now, is this a letter written by you to Mrs. Adams?
Yes.
And the second paragraph, is that an account of your informing Mrs. Adams that the matter had been discussed and they're being seriously considered?
Yes, I believe it is.
Now, the next letter that I'd like the Bishop to see is Tender Bundle 180. Now, the note on the minutes was for Margie to dialogue with Mary. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, I'm showing you a letter of the 15th of January 98. Do you recognise that as Mrs. Newton's handwriting?
Well,
perhaps you can go down and see her signature. That might be better.
Yes.
There.
Yes, I see it.
Okay, is that a letter from Mrs. Newton to Mary on the 15th of January 98? Perhaps you can go up to the first paragraph again. And you'll see that Mrs. Newton says, as one of my final jobs in the role of response coordinator for the professional standards group of the diocese, I wanted to let you know that I was able to contact AYC with reference to your complaint about Father John. Unfortunately, Mary, AYC was not able to identify the priest any further either. What does that indicate to you about Mrs. Newton's efforts on behalf of Mrs. Adams?
Well, it indicated that we went further to see if there was anyone else who could shed some light on the identity of this priest, but it wasn't successful.
And if tab 390 could be brought up, did Mrs. Adams raise this issue with you on other occasions later?
She certainly did, and comparatively recently.
And you understand that it's an important issue to her to understand who the priest was?
I certainly do understand that.
And did you continue efforts to try to locate that particular priest? And if you look at the third paragraph of that letter, that might assist.
Yes, well, we once Mary brought the issue up again, I know we made further efforts to see if we could throw some light on the mystery.
And you asked Father Grace, I think, to take some steps as well.
Father Grace had become the Vicar General, and I asked him to again check around religious orders and any other possibility that might let us know who this priest was.
And so far, nothing has come up?
No, nothing has come up.
All right. Now, you asked some questions on behalf of Mr. Carpenter this morning about the laicization of Father Durham and whether you considered that. Now, in Tender Bundle Tender Bundle tab 90, you wrote to Father Durham and you required a number of things of him in response to the charges against him. Now, the first was that he resign the office of Administrator of the Neerkol parish.
Yes.
That he stand aside from all public functions, including masses.
Yes.
That he live away from Neerkol. Now, removing his ability to function publicly as a priest, is that a protective measure for particularly of children that he might otherwise come into contact with?
Certainly is.
And how does that work when you remove the ability of a priest to celebrate Mass publicly?
Well, it means that he's not celebrating with a normal congregation around him, which would possibly include children, and therefore he's being forbidden or restricted from being part of any worshipping community.
And the standing aside from all public functions includes the ability to hear confessions, is that right?
Right.
And so he would no longer be able to act as a priest.
Exactly.
So in your mind, was this a step taken to the removal of his ability to hold himself out as a person able to act publicly as a priest?
Yes, most certainly.
And was that one of the factors you took into account when considering what was appropriate to do with Father Durham?
Yes.
Now, you asked some questions about the headstone of Father Durham.
Yes.
Now, he had a brother who was alive at the time of his death, is that right?
He did.
And he was also a priest?
He was.
And what do you think, given that you don't know, as he said to my learned friend Ms McGlinchey, anything about the headstone, do you think it's likely that quote might have come from Father Durham's brother?
Certainly could, because Father Martin Durham, his brother, was very distressed about all of the allegations. I don't believe he could accept them all, and this may have been his way of trying to remember something good about his brother. I don't really know where that quote came from or how it was put on that term.
But it certainly didn't come from you.
No, it did not.
Now, in your statement, you set out a number of the policies relating to complaint handling and the steps that were taken in the diocese of protection and education and the like. Now, you asked a number of questions about what steps you had taken, and certainly those questions didn't go much further than the late 90s. Is it the case that you, as bishop, put into place a number of structures and policies and guidelines around allegations of child sexual abuse and training in relation to their prevention?
Yes, that
its prevention, such as Towards Healing in 1997,
yes.
Integrity in Ministry in 1999.
Yes, that was a national document that we all became part of and tried to implement.
Then in 2001, there was Service with Integrity, and that's for all persons who work with the community, not just priests. Yes. Is that right? In the name of the Church. Then in June 2004, mandatory reporting in Catholic schools came in, and that was implemented in Rockhampton.
Yes, it was.
Child Safe Environment Guidelines in July 2006.
Yes, it was.
November 2006, implementation of the Volunteer Handbook for the Catholic Archdiocese of Brisbane was implemented in Rockhampton.
It was.
Child Protection Policies in January 2007.
Yes.
In November 2007, there was a further policy on creating safe environments for children and young people, and that was implemented throughout the Catholic schools and workers in Rockhampton.
Yes, it was.
Yes. When I say Rockhampton, I mean the diocese,
Yes,
not the
yes,
city.
yes.
And April 2008, there was a diocesan child protection policy which updated the earlier policy of that name.
Certainly was.
And that included codes of conduct and the like. And then in April 2008, Margaret Tucker implemented a process by which people who were key to child protection policies were provided with support and education about those policies.
Correct.
February 2010, the Code of Conduct applying to Catholic education in the Diocese of Rockhampton. 2011, Integrity in the Service of the Church.
Yes, that was certainly implemented then.
And then in 2012, a number of codes of conduct relating to young people, student protection and conduct for all employees working with children and young people were implemented.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, I've taken you to some of the training and development in paragraph 137. And you have also implemented, or Mr Browning implemented, the Commission for Children and Young People and Child Guardian Act 2000 provisions within the education processes of the diocese. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Now, you're asked some questions about what you have done, and the questions asked by my learned friend Mr Kernaghan were specifically what you had done in relation to bearing witness to the evidence or the stories of people who had been abused as children by priests. And Mr Kernaghan asked you about whether you attended court hearings where Father Durham was on trial, and you said you had not.
No.
Have you done other things in order to hear the stories of and the accounts of people who have been abused, such as attending towards healing facilitations?
I believe that I have been open to any approach from those who have survived sexual abuse, and I can't name them all now, but I believe once I understood and had that learning experience myself that I was quite willing to be with people who approached me and to hear their stories.
And you've indeed maintained, as we've heard, relationships with some of the people who have given evidence last week and heard their stories and listened to their pain.
I have all suffered greatly, but some who I seem to identify more with, I've contacted each Christmas and each Easter just to see how they were travelling.
And I think Mr Owen said you contacted him on a regular basis?
Yes, yes.
And there are other people who have been through Neerkol who are not part of this hearing, so I won't ask you to say their names, but with whom you've had contact in the past and ongoing.
Yes, I believe so.
And you were here for the whole of last week's evidence?
I was.
And heard the stories which were given last week by those 13 people. Is there something that you would like to say to the witnesses who gave evidence last week?
Well, I would like to say something in this sense that I've already acknowledged that my learning experience was a gradual one, and I hope that it has been a genuine one in the sense of coming to realise something of the suffering, because I don't believe we can experience that until we've been through it. But I think this week, and I would say this to the survivors who presented their stories, that I have read their stories, or sometimes heard their stories verbally, but then read them. But this week, when I heard them presenting their stories, themselves, and the personal dimension and the emotional reaction that they bared before all has just been a new experience for me to realise all over again how dreadful it must have been for them, not only at the time but in the subsequent time when they have seen their lives often spoiled, and even at this later stage of life they're trying to piece it all together. So I want to just say to them again, my heart goes out to you, and it's been reinforced this week because of what you shared with us. And I realise that you have represented many people who couldn't be here. Some have died, and some couldn't be here. So I feel a terrible sense of shame and disgrace over what happened to you at Neerkol or anywhere else, and I just hope and pray that the experience for you this week has brought you some relief, some advance of a little bit more peace to know that you've been heard. Having not been heard, you have been heard, and I and the people directly involved with the suffering that you heard in a transitory way have listened to what you have said.
And is there something that you would like to say to the Commission about its work here in Rockhampton?
Yes, I would like to express to you, the Commissioners and Your Honour, the gratitude of the work of the Commission, because something has happened that didn't happen before. I understand that we tried, as the awareness grew on us, to deal with this, but I think the Commission has given to the survivors an opportunity to be heard very openly and honestly, without any reservations. And I simply hope that the work of the Commission will be ongoing and will not just done. I think one of the survivors said will not just be closed away, but will result in a whole new appreciation of the sacredness, the dignity of children and the need for their protection. So I'd like to say thank you to you on behalf of this community, the diocese. And the diocese is made up of people, it's made up of priests and religious and lay people who've been shamed by what has happened. And I see you as a commission which may begin to change, or has begun to change, or will continue to change the culture in which we live, in which this could even happen, and which has been so covered. So thank you for the gift that you are as a commission. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions.
Bishop Heenan, there's just a couple of matters that I'd like to ask you some questions about. The first is in relation to the protocol which the trial edition came into place in June 1994. And perhaps if we can bring up document 38 in the tender bundle. Bishop Heenan, I asked you some questions about this yesterday, but I just wanted to clarify a couple of matters.
Certainly.
You were part of the conference which formulated these protocols, is that right?
That's right.
These matters were first considered by the Queensland Catholic Bishops' Conference as early as 1988?
I wasn't there then, I don't know that.
Okay. And as of the time you became Bishop of Rockhampton in 1991, you were familiar with the fact these matters were being raised and discussed, that is, protocols to respond to allegations of sexual abuse.
Well, I would have become familiar, yes.
And did you agree with them?
Yes, I believe I did.
And when you, shortly after you became Bishop of Rockhampton in 1991, you obviously became familiar with the protocols. And indeed, the protocols in their infancy, and also when they came into practice in 1994, in June 1994, you were familiar with them.
Yes.
Can I ask you this, in respect of the complaint that was made directly to you by AYB,
Yes.
in responding to that complaint, did you have regard to the protocols?
I believe I tried to have regard. I'm not sure how fully or how adequately.
Well, looking back to that time, so from about July 1993, moving forward to early 1994, did you have regard to the protocols in their infancy? So they wouldn't have actually been in place then, but of course they were being formulated and you understood that the reasoning and the process behind them existed.
Yes.
Did you have regard to the sentiment and the process behind them in dealing with that complaint by AYB?
Well, I believe I did. I'm not sure how adequately.
So can I just take you to the procedures which are set out at paragraph 5 of those protocols? And if we scroll down to under 5.5, now, while this protocol came into place in June 1994, part of the protocol said that the primary function of the delegate is to act as soon as possible in a discreet and pastoral manner to determine whether there are reasonable grounds to believe that there has been an abuse. Do you see that? If we scroll right down.
I've lost it a bit now.
Okay.
Back now.
So
Can I ask you again where we are?
we're just, if you see subparagraph D, if we go down to the second paragraph underneath that.
Yes, I see.
Now, you understood in 1993, so as part of the Bishops' Conference and as a bishop in your position, that when a complaint was received about sexual abuse, it was important to respond promptly to that complaint.
Yes, yes.
You understood that, didn't you? And I think you accepted yesterday that you didn't respond as promptly as you could have to AYB's complaint. Yep. Did you also understand, if we look at 5.7, that another procedure is contained at 5.7, that it will be standard procedure for the accused to be given special leave while action in response to an allegation is being pursued? Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And that was in place as of June 1994? And was Father Durham, he was an administrator at that time of the Neerkol parish?
Yes, he was.
And was he placed on special leave?
No, he wasn't.
And can you say why that procedure wasn't followed?
Well, I understand that AYB did not want this to proceed, and I therefore did not go down this path because I understood that AYB did not want the proceedings which would affect her family and others, and that's the reason I believe that I did not implement that.
But would you agree that 5.7, that procedure, is also a protective measure, isn't it, for children who come into contact with the accused person?
Yes, I can understand that now.
And as of May 1994, so from July 1993, June, July 1993 until May 1994, you were in discussions with AYB as to the response that she would like in respect to her complaint. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that culminated in a meeting between AYB and Father Durham?
Yes.
And did you consider it appropriate during that time to place Father Durham on some sort of leave to ensure the protection of other children who might come into contact with him?
No, I did not.
No. And do you agree that that doesn't comply or support the procedure encapsulated in 5.7 and prior to June 1994, the ethos or the reasoning behind that, namely the protection of children?
Yes, I can see that.
If we go back to 5.3, there is also, as part of these procedures outlined in paragraph 5, at 5.3 it makes clear that the notifier, that is the person who receives the complaint, is not to contact the accused.
Well, Your Honour, can I object to that? There is a restriction on that. The notifier that's in cases where the alleged victim is currently a child or vulnerable adult. It may not be something that specifically applies to these circumstances. And if that is the case, then that should be put in the question to make it more fair.
No, I agree with that. I'll rephrase the question. Do you see when you look at the first sentence in 5.3?
Yes.
That where the alleged victim is currently a child or vulnerable adult and an allegation is made to a third party, then the following is to occur. And subparagraph D is that the notifier is not to contact the accused.
Yes.
Did you consider AYB to be a vulnerable person?
No, not at that stage.
And did you consider whether it was appropriate to contact the accused?
Well, again, I say I interpreted that was AYB's wish. Did I not do that? You had a meeting with Father Durham in which you told him of the allegations by AYB? No, I believe I had a meeting. Well, no, let me rephrase that. I think, yes, the first meeting I arranged for him with Father Hines, I would have given him the reasons for the meeting.
And you did that with Father Hines?
Yes, yes.
And is it your evidence you did that on the request of AYB?
Yes.
And it was in that context that you advised him of the allegations raised by AYB?
Yes.
Having regard to the procedures set out in 5, or paragraph 5, you accept in the ways that I've said you didn't comply with those procedures in your dealings with AYB. Can you say why that was?
Well, again, I was guided by the understanding that I had that AYB did not want things to proceed beyond her revealing it to me, meeting with Father Durham, and that she didn't wish things to go further because they would be revealed to her parents and others. That would be my reason.
But you agree that in the period between June 1993 and May 1994, you were aware of the form of these procedures?
Yes, yes.
Because you had been part and parcel of creating them, is that correct? And do you say you actually had regard to them in dealing with AYB?
Well, I'm not sure how much regard I had for them. I can realise now not sufficient regard.
You were also directly informed of the allegation made by AYP in 1996.
Yes.
And you say at paragraph 43 of your statement how that came about. In short, you were informed by Father Grace of a complaint by AYP that he had received, and then you then became involved in your capacity as the bishop. In 1996, the protocols were certainly in place that we find in tab 38. That's correct?
So the Queensland?
Yes.
Yes, right.
And in dealing with the complaint by AYP, did you have regard to these protocols?
I believe I would have been aware of them.
At this stage, the delegate was Father Grace.
Yes.
So in 1996, Father Grace had taken over from Father Hines as the Vicar General.
That's correct.
And he was the delegate.
Yes.
And again, at that stage, was Father Durham placed on leave in accordance with 5.7?
No, he wasn't.
And in accordance with 5.8, were appropriate professional support services offered to AYP? Assistance that you gave to the police in respect to the prosecution of Father Durham involving the allegations made by AYB? You recall those questions?
Yes, sir.
And as I understand it, you made clear to Council that your obligation and duties towards your priests would never preclude you or in any way inhibit you from assisting the police in any criminal investigations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you referred to the fact that you had provided a statement to the police about the criminal allegations against AYB.
Yes.
But you weren't ultimately called to give evidence in any prosecution involving the complaints made by AYB, were you?
We're not.
And in fact, your statement to the police referred to your meetings with Father Durham about AYB and the meetings that you had where AYB, or the meetings that were had between AYB and Father Durham, and what you understood to be the impact or context of that.
Yes.
Would you agree that there is nothing in the statement that you provided to the police which in any way incriminates Father Durham? That's correct, isn't it?
I would have to see it again.
Okay. Perhaps if the witness can be shown a statement CTJH 200 01134 0010. If we scroll down, you say you're a 59-year-old male. You're currently the Bishop of Rockhampton. Now, this is a statement dated the 4th of January 1997. You speak of being ordained as a priest. You say that you know Father Durham. Paragraph 5, you speak of Father Durham having resigned as a parish priest in about 1993.
Yes.
And that he became the administrator to the parish. Then you speak of having received a letter from AYB.
Yes.
And that in the letter there was a disclosure of sexual abuse by a priest, but Father Durham wasn't named. The second letter that you received is referred to in paragraph 8. The request for a meeting at paragraph 9.
Yes.
Then you refer at paragraph 10, your meeting with AYB on the 10th of February 1994. And then it's in that meeting that you speak of the allegations, a further letter on the 13th of February 1994. And then at paragraph 13 you say that it's about this time you're advised by AYB that it's Father Durham who's the perpetrator. And then at paragraph 15 you speak of your conversation with Father Hines, who is to become the delegate under the protocol. Paragraph 17, there's a reference to the meeting that was arranged with Father Hines and Father Durham at your home. And this is the meeting where you leave after a certain period, so there are no admissions made in your presence during that meeting.
That's correct.
Then there's a reconciliation meeting with AYB arranged. And this, at paragraph 21, this is arranged for the 4th of May 1994, and you say you did not attend this meeting.
Correct.
You say you have a brief conversation with Father Hines about that meeting. So during the course of this statement, you provide no incriminatory evidence against Father Durham because you're not in possession of any. That's right?
Yes.
So, of course, if you had given evidence, there would be nothing that would tell against any that would undermine Father Durham's defence. That's correct? Bishop Heenan, have you ever given evidence against a priest other than Father Durham?
No, I have not.
And have you ever provided a statement to the police with incriminatory evidence?
I believe so.
So really, you've never been put in a position where your duties to your priest has come into conflict with the criminal investigation of a priest. You were asked some questions about laicizing Father Durham and the fact that you didn't do that.
Yes.
That has occurred with other priests, hasn't it?
Yes.
In your diocese. Can I ask that the document under Tender Bundle 333 is brought up? This is the 27th of February. This is dated the 27th of February 2004.
Yes.
And you make a formal application for Reverend Michael McArdle to be defrocked or laicized. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was actually in relation to sexual offending against children.
Yes.
And can you provide any explanation as to the distinction you drew, if any, between Reverend McArdle and Father Durham?
Well, with Father McArdle, or Michael McArdle, when he was convicted, or before he was convicted, when he was accused, he wrote me a letter saying he wanted to resign from the priesthood and from the Catholic Church altogether. So he undertook a complete sort of decision of separation, and it was on those grounds that I decided to complete that separation by applying for his laicization.
So is it your evidence it was at Reverend McArdle's instigation that this application was made?
No, it was not. It was my application, but it was on his statement of his position. That
in your mind, is defrocking or laicizing a priest also a protective measure for parishioners?
No, I don't believe so.
So, is the distinction you drew between Reverend McArdle and Father Durham that Reverend McArdle wanted to leave the church, whereas Father Durham had never indicated that?
Well, there is that difference.
Was that a difference of significance to you?
Probably was.
So what is the criteria against which a person is dismissed, a priest is dismissed or laicized?
Yes, yes. Well, I'd have to rethink this before I answer that question. I'd have to go and look again at the conditions or the surrounding legislation for laicization.
Isn't part and parcel, mustn't it be part and parcel of any criteria or condition that a person be laicized, whether or not they're fit to hold that position? Whether they have the moral integrity to hold that position?
Yes, that would be.
And as of 1997, when Father Durham made those admissions and pleaded guilty to sexually offending against AYB, did you consider to have the moral integrity and standing to hold a position as a priest?
Well, I was obviously appalled by his offending, but I didn't consider laicization at that time or at any time.
Did you turn your mind to whether he should be laicized at that time?
I don't believe I did.
And is the reason you turned your mind to the issue of Reverend McArdle being dismissed from the priesthood because he had raised his desire to leave the priesthood?
No, I don't think so. I think because of his offending, which was very widespread and serious, that I felt that was the appropriate step to take.
Wasn't the offending to which Father Durham had admitted, combined with the other allegations, serious enough for you to turn your mind to this issue of him being laicized?
I understand that now, yes.
And do you accept that you should have done that in 1997 by the very latest?
Yes, I would still like to look at terms of laicization before answering that question fully.
What aspects do you need to look at?
Reasons provided for laicization.
Do you mean the reasons in canon law, Bishop? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I do, yes.
But you accept that it was something you should have at the very least turned your mind to?
Yes.
I'll now just ask you some questions on one final topic, about which you were asked some questions by your counsel. And that relates to the policies that have been implemented while you were the Bishop of Rockhampton. And if we could just bring up from paragraph 120 of your statement. The policy of the Catholic Education Office, sorry, I'll withdraw that. You say at paragraph 120 that in July 1994, the Catholic Education Office adopted the policy and pastoral guidelines on child protection in Catholic schools in the Diocese of Rockhampton. Who developed those pastoral guidelines?
I believe it would have been within the leadership of the Catholic Education Office itself.
And is that a national body or is that a Queensland body?
It's a diocesan body.
Right.
It may have been in association with other Queensland dioceses or possibly Australia, but it would have been within the diocesan Catholic Education Office of Rockhampton.
And did you have any actual involvement in the development of those guidelines?
Not directly.
And if we move to paragraph 121, towards healing was a national policy?
Yes.
That was then adopted by your diocese?
Yes.
Along with other Queensland dioceses?
Yes.
And the paragraph 122, the integrity in ministry document?
Yes.
That again is a national document?
Yes, it is.
That was then adopted by your diocese?
Yes.
And what about paragraph 123, again a national document, is that correct?
No, that was a diocesan document as far as I recall.
And then paragraph 124, this relates to mandatory reporting. Was that developed by your Catholic Education Office in consultation with other offices within Queensland?
I would say so.
And that in turn was influenced by national officers? Or was it particular to the state legislation?
Well, I really can't answer that one.
Okay. And at 125, the parish guide to a child-safe environment that the diocese adopted.
Yes.
Who was that created by?
Beg pardon?
Who was it created by? Who was it
It
written
would have been created by, I understand, our own diocesan Towards Healing group, and at the instigation or the implementation of a wider understanding throughout Queensland that probably was shared by various dioceses.
So many of the policies that you've referred to are in fact national policies which were then implemented in the diocese in Rockhampton, that's correct. Just one final question. You were asked some questions about you gave some evidence about the financial redress that was provided to former residents of Neerkol. And we've heard evidence that Sisters of Mercy provided 50% of the lump sum compensation payments, and the diocese provided the other 50%.
Yes.
Was there any reason why it was divided 50-50, why that percentage was divided in that way?
I think the reason would have been that Neerkol Orphanage was conducted by the Sisters of Mercy. Parish priests were appointed there by the bishop, and they were responsible for terrible abuse, and therefore, while the orphanage would have been seen as a ministry of the Sisters of Mercy, it was, in most people's view, a ministry of the Catholic Diocese of Rockhampton with priests appointed. So my reasoning would be that we should jointly support this very sad situation.
Would you agree that a large proportion of the sexual allegations were made against former parish priests of the Neerkol parish?
Yes, I would.
That the sexual allegations in respect of former nuns was a smaller proportion of the sexual claims?
Yes.
And do you also agree that the diocese was not as financially inhibited or not as financially constrained as the Sisters of Mercy?
Well, the Sisters of Mercy, I don't know their full situation. I do know the situation. I did know the situation of the diocese, but I wouldn't say that they were more constrained than we were. But we honestly tried to come together to provide support.
Do you think that a 50-50 split was a fair representation of the harm and the culpability for that harm caused at Neerkol?
Well, I did at the time, and I believe the sisters and I agreed at the time, so I see no reason to alter that situation or alter that view of mine.
Do you think that, given what I would suggest is less financial constraint on the diocese, that there should have been an offer of more than a 50% contribution by the diocese to compensation for former residents?
No, I think we worked out the agreement together, and I think I accept that we had an agreement there which we implemented.
So do you say you're content with that from a moral point of view?
Well, I'm not sure whether content is the word, but I feel, knowing the diocese, knowing the relationship between the Sisters of Mercy and the diocese, I feel it was just.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Just a clarification, if I can, please, Bishop, arising from Councillor Sisting's questions. I wonder if we could just bring up paragraphs 128 to 131 of the Bishop's statement. Bishop, if you look at paragraph 128, it covers the financial costs of operating the Professional Standards Office from 1997 to 2011, so for 14 years. And the first sentence reads, the total cost of operating the PSO from 1997 until 2011 is at least $1,232,435. You see that?
Excuse me, I cannot see that. Am I missing it somewhere?
Paragraph 128. Oh, my apologies. It's in Sister Locke's statement. My apologies.
Yes.
Just bring that up. My apologies to you, Bishop. You see the first sentence there? It says the total cost of operating the Professional Standards Office was $1,232,435.
Yes.
Now, the Professional Standards Office functioned for both the Sisters of Mercy and the diocese as a whole, didn't it?
No, it didn't. They were separate.
Two separate
Two
ones.
separate groups. Yeah.
So the costs of operating your own Professional Standards Office were completely separate, a completely separate organisation?
They were.
And where did the funds for that come from?
Well, they would have come from just diocesan revenues that were able to be directed towards the cost of our Professional Standards organisation.
So you were able to draw it from reserves and surpluses and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. But just with respect to Councillor Sisting's question, in Sister Rowan's statement to paragraph 67, she indicates that the Sisters of Mercy eventually sold the whole of Neerkol to help fund their contribution.
Yes.
That wasn't necessary for the diocese to sell any assets.
No, it wasn't. No.
All right. Thank you. I just wanted to get that clarification.
Before we rise, I would like to withdraw a suggestion that I made to Bishop Heenan earlier today, which I now understand to be incorrect. I suggested to Bishop Heenan that the words, "Thou hast made us a royal place, a priest to serve God," is in fact an inscription on Father Durham's headstone. I now understand it to be an inscription on a stone which marks the entrance of the Catholic part of the ceremony, part of the cemetery where Father Durham is buried, but not upon his personal headstone. And I apologise for that mistake, and I apologise to you, Bishop Heenan.
Thank you. Bishop, just one final matter before we excuse you, and obviously I'm not going to take you back through all of the evidence that you've given before the Commission, but just ask you whether or not you'd agree with me that as at 1993, the effect of the evidence that you've given to the Commission with respect to your response to the allegations that were coming to you was that you were struggling with your struggling to believe those allegations of sexual abuse by clergy and religious?
I was struggling, and I was finding it difficult to accept, but not from AYB.
No, I understand that. But with respect to the other allegations that were coming coming to your attention in 1993 and 4 and indeed up to 1996, and that the effect of your evidence is that you were that you have, I think, described your knowledge and understanding of the nature of child sexual abuse and its impact on the survivors of that abuse as, this is my language, not yours, as not adequate at that time.
I would agree.
And that you developed a better understanding as the years went by and you were exposed to more and more information both coming to you from survivors and indeed in various other ways through meetings and exposure to the opinion of experts. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, I would say that's reasonable.
And that in answer to some of the questions that were put to you generally from the bar table, I think you've accepted that some of your actions and inactions, in particular, for example, the letter that you sent, the much regretted letter that you sent now in September of 1996, was in part motivated by your desire to protect the reputation of the sisters, the priests and indeed the church.
Yes, Your Honour, and also Neerkol as
an institution.
Yes, which I didn't understand the story.
Is it, and you've then gone on to speak of, in particular through the questions put by Ms Needham, of the various actions that you've taken to participate in the development of your understanding and your response to the victims, to the survivors, I should say. Is it implicit in where you are today as you sit before the Royal Commission that you now have a different view about how best the reputation of the church, as that expression's been used, should be protected in the face of allegations of sexual abuse by priests, clergy and religious?
Yes, I have, Your Honour, and the view would be we need to be totally honest and open in a way that we haven't been before, and that's been a growing experience, I think, for myself very certainly, but for the whole of the church, I believe that we have a different approach, and it was difficult that it took so long for us to be so open.
Anything arising out of that?
Not out of that, something briefly out of Ms David's questions at the end, if Your Honour would give me leave.
I will give you leave, Ms Needham, yes.
Bishop, Learned Senior Counsel assisting asked you some questions about the breakup of payments between the diocese and the Sisters of Mercy.
Yes.
And that the payments were 50-50. And she asked you some questions about whether that was fair, given that the sexual abuse emanated almost entirely from the priests of the diocese. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, I do, yes.
Is it the case that, as far as you understand it, the payments were split 50-50, whether the complaints were of sexual abuse, sexual and physical abuse, or physical abuse only?
Yes, it is my understanding that it covered all forms of abuse. So
the diocese contributed 50% of all payments to persons who, for example, only had physical abuse claims and not sexual abuse claims?
Yes, that's correct.
And again, the sisters contributed to payments for people who might have had much less in the way of physical complaints but more of sexual abuse by priests.
Yes, that's correct.
And is it the case that that decision to split 50-50 was not so much a quantification of particular cases of abuse but a general split overall?
Yes, as I tried to explain, I think it was a shared responsibility for the tragedy.
No further questions.
Nothing, Your Honour, except to tender the witness statement of Bishop Heenan that was referred to in evidence.
This is the police statement.
It is, Your Honour, dated the 4th of January 1997.
Does that come with the summons?
It does, yes.
26.20.
Thank you.